Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday evening, but I just got finished filming a podcast with the Sequence Break podcast, and I already have my camera and microphone set up, and I'm already in a good mood, so I figured why not just record tonight and then put it out in the morning. So here we go. First up, over on YouTube, Retron says they're using the GC Dual, but was wondering if there was a good way to scale it to 2x for capturing. So I'm going to need more information to really answer this question, but I'm going to speculate a bit and try to help. And if I get it wrong, please ask again, and I'll follow up in next week's. But if you're using the GC Dual, which I think that's the GC video-based internal solution for a GameCube, and that would output in whatever the native resolution of the GameCube is. However, there is line doubling built in. So if for whatever reason the game you're playing is in 240p, it would double that to 2x to 480p. And same thing, if for whatever reason you're playing a 480i game, it would use what's called Bob deinterlacing to set that to 480p as well. And if that's what you're talking about, all you have to do is just set the GC Dual to output 480p and connect it to your capture card that way. And that should be it. Now, if you're talking about 2x output, you could also be talking about its native 480p being doubled. And if that's the case, I would do that right through your capture software. I would go into OBS. Depending on the game, you might want a sharper scale. So you might want to do point scaling, or you might want to do bilinear or any of the other options. Really just mess with it. But the only thing that I would probably recommend doing is just doubling it exactly. So, go into OBS, add the source, and then whatever the source resolution is, double the horizontal and vertical, and then try it that way, and then select based on that. Depending on the game, a soft scale is not going to matter, but it's probably best to start that way and kind of go from there. And if you are talking about, like, let's say, for example, you just want a game on a flat panel, but you want to do some kind of 2x scale to see what you could get, which is something I've talked about quite a bit, specifically in the Dreamcast and PlayStation HDMI mod videos, but also just over the years. Anytime you're able to use the open source scan converter, the OSSC, you could take a 480p input signal, use the OSSC to sharp scale it to 960p, and then your TV smooth scales it to the rest of whatever it is to fill the panel. And I've really found on a lot of 4K TVs, the sharp scale from 480p to 960p and then smooth the rest of the way up gives a look that really just makes these games feel a lot more modern than they are, especially on the Dreamcast for whatever reason. But having that 480p doubled to 960p and then stretched the rest of the way, Dreamcast games felt like PS3 games. So I think I covered all use case scenarios there, but please let me know if there was something different and more specific that you wanted answered. Now moving over to Patreon. First up, Firebrand X wanted to chime in about last week's discussion of, is there a difference between optical audio and what you get over HDMI? And according to Firebrand X, optical is prone to jitter error. As such, parts are installed to correct for jitter, but if it's bad enough, it could affect the quality of the sound. These are extreme case scenarios. However, coaxial or any copper solution like an HDMI does not have jitter to worry about. It's technically the superior method for transmitting digital audio, but for whatever marketing reasons, coaxial has been pushed aside and optical far more supported. All that said, 99.99% of users will not have any issues whatsoever with optical transmission lines. So it does kind of line up with what I thought. I guess there's also been some kind of, depending on what type of audio over 5.1 surround, you might be able to get better over HDMI. But the question last week was, is there a difference and is there better? Is one better than the other? And I guess my conclusion last week was good enough in that in the context of retro gaming, which would never go over 5.1 surround sound and probably doesn't even hit that, there should not be a difference at all. I've definitely seen people demonstrate ground loop issues, but I don't know. I would just call them both even overall. And if you run into an issue, it's got to be a really weird use case scenario. So thanks to everybody who chimed in for that and everybody who chimed in on the YouTube comments. I'm glad I got it right enough in that in the context of retro gaming, HDMI audio and optical audio is pretty much going to be the same in most cases. Doobs in Shower wants to know if I think there will ever be an end to the mods that we can do. Is there such thing as a feature-complete retro console? What types of mods do you wish we could have? So I don't think there will ever be an end to any of this. And I especially don't think so because even if you decide, you know what, there's so many amazing new ways to play these consoles, so I'm going to keep my original consoles as stock as possible and only use the Mister, but enjoy both for what they are. Even in that scenario, there's weird and neat new things that you could do to the originals that aren't really modding, but could still get some cool stuff out of them. Or even on the flip side, you could start to do crazy stuff to the originals that involves motherboard swaps and changing parts out, and there's really no end to this. It's exactly like cars. There is never going to be an end to what you could do to mod your car, whether it's an old car or whether it's a brand new one. It's just constantly evolving. And on top of that, every time a new idea comes out, there's always evolutions of that idea, and it's awesome. It's a lot of fun. So, on the other hand, though, a feature-complete retro console is any console that just does what you want it to. So if you go to your retro game store and you pick up an NES and you buy your 5 or 6 favorite games and you stop on the side of the road and pick up a CRT that's left there that still works and you connect it with composite video, that's a perfectly feature-complete retro gaming setup right there. And you might not ever need more than that. So the good news is if you're a nerd and you constantly want to talk about new enhancements and see what else is coming, there's never going to be an end to it. But on the flip side, if you just want to play some old games and not have to worry about lag, you could just go back and do it the way everybody's done it since they were new. And that's still something I would call feature complete. Photosphene was following up in the conversation from last week about breaking out composite video from a SCART connector and said, so there are adapters that break out SCART to composite. Good to know. I always only used the other way around. Funny you mentioned that. I got an email from my friend Fudo about this, and he was asking, how come I always show that other adapter when that other adapter I showed last week doesn't actually break out composite video? It only breaks out component video and audio. And the very honest truth is I do this stuff in real time, and I have a drawer right here that I made my standing desk out of, like IKEA plastic shelves with an adjustable desk on it. And the one I showed last week just always happens to be at the top of the pile. So I promised Fudo that I would put that to the bottom of the pile, bring this one to the top, and probably plenty of others like it. But this one breaks out RGB and sync, and in the case of composite video over SCART, sync would be composite video. And this adapter even has a little switch that changes it from input to output. So this could absolutely break out composite video. So yeah, thanks to Fudo for reminding me that I was showing the wrong adapter. But the answer, the verbal answer, not the visual cue, was correct last week. And yes, you could find adapters, especially like the one I actually just showed, that breaks out composite video. And there's different ones out there. You can get one that do composite video and audio, RGBS. I think there's ones. Actually, I'm really hoping people will take the open source SCART coupler project and change that around to stuff exactly like what I just showed. Maybe it breaks out RGBS like I showed in that adapter, but with a 3.5 millimeter jack on the side for audio. I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer to that. So if anybody is willing to, go ahead and fork that project and make your own, and make a community-based one for people that want to break this stuff out. Alan Bingham had a really lengthy question, so I'm going to try to get through it quickly just out of respect for everybody else's time too. So the question is that Alan's interested in doing RGB mods for both the NES and N64. Since these are childhood consoles, I'd like to avoid cutting the original shells. I have a few questions regarding this. Am I correct in assuming that the N64 RGB mod doesn't require any cutting of the shell since it utilizes the existing AV multi-out to output the RGB signal? Yeah, so whether it's the easy mod, if you happen to have the older revision N64, or the advanced mod, the shell isn't touched at all. It's all done internally, and the mod is 100% reversible. So if you ever want to become a preservationist and put your console back to the way it was, it's totally fine. Next, I've seen that there is a no-cut mod for the front loader NES RGB kit now, but it utilizes a totally different video output port than the SNES multi-out. Do you know of an alternative no-cut mod that allows the AV multi-out to be installed on the front loader NES? I plan on using HD Retrovision's Super Nintendo component cable, so that's why this is so important. Nope, you're going to have to cut it. The only other thing you could do is have a pigtail adapter soldered in that dangles out the back that has the SNES multi-out, even just wrapped in tape or something that would look terrible but would work fine, and you could plug it in that way. But you could also just use the Genesis 2 adapter and buy two HD Retrovision cables. I believe that's the one that's out there. I have one here, and I just haven't installed it yet because that's going in cousin Scott's NES, which is in storage. Whole long, boring story, but the best answer is no. You'd have to do something else. Next, if your answer to the previous question is no, do you have any idea where I could purchase custom shells for the NES front loader? I obviously wouldn't care if a different shell was being cut on, not to mention changing the color of the NES would be pretty cool. On that note, what about the N64? Any idea where custom shells could be purchased for this console? I feel like I've looked all over the internet for custom shells for both of these, and I've had zero luck. It's because there's zero out there, which stinks, because there's amazing and beautiful case reproductions for the PC Engine and for the Saturn. I posted that all over social media. I did one for my friend and swapped the case around. I really hope people get, and Dreamcast as well. I don't know how I forgot that one, but I really hope people get around to making them for Genesis, Super Nintendo, and N64. And I truly think that the Warrior 64 would have been, if it was just a case, I think it would have been wildly successful, and I think people would have really bought the heck out of it. And I know a lot of people thought it was ugly, which is fair. That's totally an opinion, but I think a custom shell for it, whether it's a copy of the original or its own unique design, would have been a great answer for all of these. So if you're insistent upon using the SNES multi-out, the only other thing I would suggest is look into doing the mod to a top-loading NES and then just replace the back port with the one that I believe Greg Collins sells a good one. I believe there's some open source ones as well, but check out LaserBear for that, and then use your front loader as just your original console. You did specifically say these were childhood consoles though, so I would say that the best answer by far would be using the no-cut mod that replaces the RF box with it, which is good not only because you get RGB routed without a cut, but the capacitors in the RF box are all starting to leak out now and starting to ruin the RF box, which has the power circuit on it. So that's just even more longevity for you, and then dropping the money on the second set of HD Retrovisions. So probably not the answer you wanted, but that is the best answer for this. Dietrich Harms said they have multiple Trinitrons and HD Retrovision component-connected consoles. They have a strange issue with their one-chip Super Famicom using the HD Retrovision component. It exhibits a diagonal scrolling effect on their one Trinitron that has good geometry, but not the others. I've tried 2 different power supplies. Any suggestions? I've heard complaints like this before, and it's with any video output, and my gut always tells me power with stuff like this. Now, I'm not always right. There's other factors that could be involved. And in fact, I've seen consoles end up with bad memory or bad video chips or something. But my question to you would be, the power supplies that you've used, are they official Super Nintendo? And if not, are they a known good replacement like the Triads? If the answer is no, that's where I would start. Get one of the Triads. Even if you're international, check out Firebrand X's link to the international version of those things. You need the power supply and then the pigtail, but it's worth it. Those are great. If, let's just say you are using a brand new Triad and you're still having this issue, try looking into replacing the voltage regulator inside the Super Nintendo, the 7805. I've never seen diagonal scrolling, but I have seen replacing that fix other issues that were a little weird. Not common, but definitely something that's worth swapping out, both because it's easy and because while they're not known to die, they will at some point. At some point between now and never, the 7805 is probably going to die before the other components on there. So it's worth swapping out. And then just weird power things, like make sure your TV and the Super Nintendo are plugged into the same power strip, which is plugged into the same thing on the wall. If you're using power conditioners, unplug those to see if that makes a difference. But chasing down diagonal scrolling can be from so many different things. My gut always says power, but or start with power at least, and then kind of go from there. So maybe try the things I mentioned and cross your fingers, and if not, we could dig deeper into it, but it's probably going to be a hard one. Zags was following up on the issue they had last week of their image freezing randomly. I think they would start a game and the audio would keep playing, but the image would freeze. And it seems that their OSSC is overheating. It's not in a closed box or anything else, just sitting on a shelf. Have I heard of the OSSC doing this? I currently have the top layer off, so the chips are exposed better. Can play well for over an hour with it exposed, maybe 5 minutes covered. Any ideas? My first question would be, where did you get this? Was this one of the AliExpress ones? And I'm sorry if you answered last week. I probably should have checked before, but I do these all in real time. So did you get it from Video Game Perfection, or did you get it from one of the knockoff sellers? And if that's your answer, then my guess would be that's the problem, that it was cheaply manufactured and the overheating is a result of something else. But if you got it direct from Video Game Perfection, I've never had a problem with mine overheating. And there's even people working on enclosed cases for it that have done heat tests, and they haven't had any problems with it overheating with a completely enclosed case with just basic venting, not even a fan. So that would be my first question. Is it used? Did you get it from AliExpress? And if it is going direct, or if you did get it direct from, the one reseller that's the official, I think you could say, I don't know. Maybe there's just a rare issue with it, and I would contact them to see if you can get it repaired or anything like that. But yeah, definitely start with where you got it. Dan Bailey wants to know if I'm going to be doing any further videos talking about RGB modding consumer grade TVs. And I did one a few years ago with my friend Jose. I think it was the first video we ever did together. And I mentioned that I was going to be doing a more extensive video, and I never did it, mostly because of space. I would really need to have a whole bunch of CRTs set up, and I'd want to show the process for each. And I just really need, it would be a longer term project. But the other reason I haven't started it is it's one of these projects that wouldn't really end, because how to RGB mod a Super Nintendo Mini. There's always different ways to make a better video, but the mod's still going to be connect the 4 wires to a quality board, and it's not really going to change from there. Whereas every different TV you find might be a different mod. It might require a different circuit or different resistors or something like that. So I would really have to figure out a way to make it more of a general video. But the problems that you specifically mentioned are the biggest problems, in how to find the information on the appropriate jungle chips, and how to use the service menus to tune in brightness and possibly other fixes. And that would be potentially different per TV. So that you could say, hey, every Sony from this year with a TV that has this shell uses this jungle chip. That's fine. But how to go into the service menu and how to do all that stuff, that would never end. I mean, I could do a video series on that once a week and probably not hit all the CRTs out there. And on the other side of things too, with the RGB to S video converters out there that work fine, as well as the RGB to component, there isn't a lot of need as much as there were a few years ago for RGB modding these. Whereas, the people that want to do something like this are people probably like yourself that enjoy the hobby, want to get the best out of their CRTs, and doing the mod is almost as fun as playing the games. Whereas there are a lot of people when this first came out that just wanted a better look, something a step over composite, and there was no other options, and now there are. So I think that's another reason why you don't see too much more on it. But hopefully Steve from RetroTech will do a few on these. I think I still have my TV with him that still needs the RGB mod put in. I need to pick up like 10 things from him. My bad, 100%. But Yeah, I think that'd probably be the channel to watch for stuff like this. Someday I will get to it. If I ever move out of the city and get a real people-sized place, I'll take my CRT collection to a basement and I'll start compiling stuff on it. Maybe I'll do like live streams when I do it. So if I get zapped, you could all laugh at me live in real time, and then just compile the videos from that into kind of a more higher production, well edited thing that people could follow. But the one thing I always have to say every time I mention CRT modding is you need to make sure that you remember that unless it's somehow your fault or some crazy circumstances, you will never die modding a Super Nintendo. You'd have to get struck by lightning while modding, or do it in the bathtub with your soldering iron plugged in. Like, just a normal modding of the Super Nintendo is 0 chance of death. And the chance of death while modding a CRT is not 0. If you don't discharge correctly and you have a bigger tube and maybe you have a heart problem that you don't even know about, it's a long shot, but it's not 0. So I have to just make sure everybody's super safe when they're working on those. Orlando Lewis said they have a bunch of CRTs and anticipate moving across states later this year. What are my recommendations in regards to packing smaller CRTs, such as 14-inch and 20-inch PVMs and 17 to 21-inch VGA monitors, in case my preferred moving method requires it? Well, if you're talking about a moving service that's going to walk up to your house, pick up stuff, walk it into a truck, stack it on the truck, I would make sure to cover the screen. So some foam and then some cardboard and tape it with like blue painter's tape so you don't get the sticky stuff all over it. And tie up any wires that are stuck in there that are not removable. A lot of VGA monitors just have that cable dangling out the back. And that would be all I would personally do, because if I'm moving it myself and renting a truck, I could just stack these monitors properly and, put them up against each other so they don't shift around, face the screens in front of something, maybe even like face all the screens forward and then put my mattress in front of them. So if I stop short, the screens go, already covered, go smushy into a mattress. So that's what I would do. But if you're relying on a bunch of other people to move your stuff, I would talk to them and just say, hey, I have a bunch of expensive equipment. Here's what it's like. What could I do to pack it properly for you? And I've done that before, and the one place I've used in the New York, Connecticut area a bunch of times, I always tell them in advance there's a bunch of heavy stuff, and it's really fragile. Please send people that don't mind that. And they actually sent the same crew twice out of the 3 times I've used them, and they were meticulous. Honestly, they were amazing. That's why I kept using them. And they weren't so expensive. They weren't cheap, but I was just upfront with them about what to expect, and they were awesome. So maybe you could just get lucky and find awesome movers like that. Scanline City wants to know if I could talk a bit about FPGA accuracy. It seems whenever a core is released, people tend to believe it's 100% accurate because it's FPGA and not emulation. However, unless I'm crazy, I tend to find many things wrong with certain games, particularly arcade cores. Playing Final Fight on the Mister, for example, the sound effects don't always play. I'm comparing all this to actual arcade boards I have. Do cores need to be continuously updated before reaching perfection? Yeah, I mean, you totally nailed it, right? So software emulation and hardware emulation all come down to the accuracy of who's writing them. And most developers who work on this stuff get it to a point where it's usable and it's fun. And you, of course, get the bonus when you're using something like the Mister that it's 0 lag as long as you don't change the settings to anything different. And it's good enough for most people, but you do still find bugs. And luckily, a lot of the people that are really into this and really dedicating their time for this hobby, they kind of move forward and, let's do something fun and new. Let me take a look at a new platform. And then every once in a while, they go back and say, all right, well, here's all the information that I've learned in all these new platforms. Let me go back in the older ones I've already worked on and see if I could apply that knowledge to tweak it and make it a little more accurate. So FPGA has the potential to be 100% accurate, or I guess technically to be even more if you have less of a tolerance in the chips, but it's not something that is necessary, at least in my opinion. I mean, at the end of the day, when people are working on this stuff over and over, the eventual goal of 100% accuracy is something I think we should all strive for, and probably in anything that you do. But to get it accurate enough where your average gamer would enjoy it, I think a lot of these things are already there, especially in the Mister. To get it accurate enough if you could use for speedruns and competitive gaming, a lot of it's there. A lot of it's real close. I think the NES core was able to be used with tool-assisted speedruns, and it ran perfect, which is a pretty insane feat. I mean, that really proves that it's down to the milliseconds of accuracy here. So, and, I don't know if you would call the NES core 100% accurate, but it was so accurate that anybody could use it now, no matter how pro you get. So that's certainly my opinion on it. I'm sure people might disagree or have different perspectives. I always appreciate the different perspectives as well. So, but it always is something to come into mind, is that anything people create like this all just comes down to how accurate their software is for it, whether it's Verilog or code or anything like that. And it's just something that most people start out just getting it done and then go back and refine as things go. So anybody that's just kind of joining the Mister project now and gets one, anything that's new out there or new features, just as with everything else, I would kind of just wait and see. And then if you find any bugs, report them through any of the bug reporting places. But they're all going to be good experiences. They're just going to take a little while to mature. And some of them already are mature. Logan wants to know if I have any plans to check out the new emulation support announced within Plex. They're setting up a Plex server and really like the idea of their games being centralized along with their movies and TV shows and streamable within the house as long as there isn't a ton of lag. I absolutely plan on checking it out. And in fact, I've wanted to interview at least some of the Plex team members for a long time, and I just never reached out. And now I think is the time that I need to, because I want to discuss this with them, and I also want to try it myself. So I might do a quick post about it this week, but then go back and dig in pretty deep. But I think there's a ton of potential here, especially if they're using anything like Parsec in order to get it done, because you could absolutely have the potential of whatever software emulation lag you would have sitting in front of your TV, or in front of your computer, you would potentially be able to have the same amount streamed throughout your home through a local area network, not on Wi-Fi. I guess if you're out in the middle of nowhere, but always hardwire if latency is an issue, even for modern games, for net play and stuff like that. But I think it has a ton of potential. So expect a short overview post soon, and then hopefully a deep dive at some point in the near future. Joaquin Coelho said they've been having a look at Sega triple bypass instructions on the net and noticed that most people don't connect the 5-volt or even ground. The pictures they found on RetroRGB from Jose are an example, and the guy from iFix Retro, Ben, connects the 5-volt but not ground. Do you know why? Are they necessary? Is there a risk if they're not connected? So this is all scenario on which model and how you're connecting the triple bypass board. And a perfect example is if you're using the Genesis 3 and you're using the bottom install method. So that's where you basically take the triple bypass and you set it over the pins on the bottom of the motherboard, and you connect everything there. You're getting 5-volt and ground from the DIN. So there's absolutely no reason to connect the pads for 5-volt and ground. However, if you're doing a top install, like with the Genesis 1 replacing the RF jack, or on some of the Model 2s where it's much easier in every way to mount the board on top and then route just the output signals around the board, in that case, you would need to do that. And actually, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe on the top, on the Genesis 1s where you mount it upside down, I think the top of the DIN is ground. I can't remember off the top of my head. So that would be the situation on why 5-volt is corrected but not ground. So it's basically something that you just got to kind of dig in. I know I had originally said I was going to do installation instructions, but there's just so many different models. And then I said, all right, well, we'll open the wiki for the public to post their own, and then we'll help edit it. But that's just, I'm so many hours a week. I haven't even played guitar in months, pretty much. So I haven't had any time to go back and check out the wiki. And I think once we get it up there and people start joining, we can get a lot of progress quickly. But I guess I got to just take some time to make the first steps to get that happening. Second question, do I know anything about the progress on the OSSC Pro? Nope. What I posted a few months ago is all that's out there, and you could follow the thread on the Shmups forum if you want like a day-by-day update, but there isn't any massive changes. To continue with Joaquin's question, though, they've been thinking about a solution for their PlayStation 2 since the OSSC only deinterlaces with the Bob deinterlacing, which is not going to be great depending on the game. And the GBSC looks like a good option, but if the OSSC Pro does a good job at deinterlacing, it would cover all their needs. So my suggestion and advice is always the same, regardless of the product. There's a solution out right now that should work fine for PlayStation 2. GBS control, you could use motion adaptive deinterlacing, get some component video cables, just get the HD Retrovision ones. It'll do a great job scaling 240p and 480p, and it'll also do a great job with the motion adaptive deinterlacing. You can get one pre-made for like $100-ish. I would just take the solution that's available right now, because we don't know when the Pro is going to be released, and we don't know what's going to be launch day features yet. And Marcus has a very solid reputation for adding features that no one expected to be possible, but sometimes those take weeks and sometimes those take years. So, absolutely no insults at all meant towards the OSSC Pro. It might launch with all of these amazing features, but there's something out there now that no matter what would be a good tool to have. So even if you end up still getting the Pro, it's not a bad thing to have the GBS control laying around. And because it's an open source project, who knows what other features people might add to it in the future. So I would definitely pick up one of those and see if that does the trick with the motion adaptive deinterlacing, and then kind of go from there with the OSSC Pro. Kirk said they just picked up a Saturn and it's a PAL Model 2. If they play NTSC games on it using the Pseudo Saturn, will they play at 60 Hz or 50 Hz? I believe 50 Hz. I'm really terrible with PAL stuff. I have so little experience with any PAL consoles, but I believe it'll just run at 50 Hz. I think you would actually need to do other mods to get it to run at different speeds, but please double check me. I'm often wrong when it comes to PAL stuff. And also they're getting an X-Station mod installed on their PAL PS1, and was wondering if the NTSC games would run at 50 or 60 Hz. Same thing. I think all of these consoles have components on them that specifically cause it to run at these frequencies, and you would need to change those components and possibly even the BIOS in them to change regions. Now, once again, definitely double check me on this one, but whenever you're talking about running different regions on different consoles, I think there's always a bit more extensive mods to get them to run at each speed. Adam Ant said they just saw that Terra Onion re-released the NeoGeo or the Neo SD Pro. They just received their regular Neo SD and didn't realize they were going to be re-releasing the Pro. What benefits do you get over the regular one? Well, I did the NeoGeo ROM cart video that went deep into this, so please check that one out, as well as the follow-up. I'll give you the short version here, but I couldn't possibly do any better than I already did in the video. So the loading times are much better, but there's also two different ways to load it. So you could put your games into up to 4 different slots where you preload the game. And the loading is a little bit faster there, but once they're loaded, those 4 games stay until you erase them and add something else. So, and once you select from each of those, loading is instant. They also have another slot that's temporary that disappears every time you turn the console off, but that loads really quick. So if you have your 4 favorite games, like for me, I have some test software in 2 of the slots, and then my two go-to games when I'm getting footage in the other 2. But when I'm actually just playing games recreationally, which doesn't happen as much as I'd like to anymore, then I just use the first slot. It loads really quickly, and I go from there. And the other bonus is that it plays NeoGeo CD games. Those load really quickly, but the CD quality audio is only in mono. So I believe you still get stereo sound effects, but the soundtrack is mono. I could be wrong about that. It could be all mono, but that wasn't so big a deal to me because I've been playing up until now only on my mini MVS, which is the mini arcade machine with the single speaker, so it made no difference. But I think I'm switching to a home console version just for space constraints, and I'm wondering if that's going to be an issue then. So please check out both of those videos. The second one's much shorter because it's just a follow-up, but that should be able to give you your answer on exactly what you need for all of those. Josh Dilly said they recently picked up their first PVM, which is a 14N6U. This monitor works with C-Sync, but it's my understanding some monitors call for a sync splitter. What situation would call for such a device? Not your monitor. So in the retro gaming world, 10 years ago, there was a whole bunch of situations where either people did need a sync stripper or thought they needed it, and I was totally guilty of that myself for a bunch. And we've really figured out exactly what's needed for each console, and at the moment, the only time something's needed to have a sync stripper is when you need voltage at a certain level, like with capture cards going direct to be specific, or for certain switches and certain devices. So in the context of you have yourself a PVM, that should work with everything. C-Sync, composite video as sync, Luma as sync, that should just work. And any switch that you connect in between that's a SCART switch should also work fine. But let's just say you have a giant setup with a bunch of consoles and you want to use an Extron crosspoint with BNC cables. Those would require a sync stripper on PlayStation because the original PlayStation and the PlayStation 2, if you're using RGB, doesn't have a C-Sync pin. It's got RGB, and then you would either use composite video or Luma as sync. And most models that I've tried, at least of the Extron crosspoint switches, will not accept Luma over the sync line, so you would need to add a sync stripper there. I mean, in almost all cases, though, you don't need one at all anymore. So I would just buy basic cables with C-Sync as sync and not ever worry about it for your setup. I did want to elaborate a little more just to explain why you might have thought you needed some, because many of us did think we needed some for quite a long time. And if you were to run into a scenario I kind of just laid out, I hope I did a decent job laying out what to expect. But for just SCART consoles to a monitor, I don't think you would ever need that in your scenario. Another novel of a question from Alan Bingham. I'll go through this one quickly as well. The question spawned from my post on RetroRGB regarding the Saturn FRAM mod. They're intrigued by this mod because they'd love to ditch the battery completely and not have to worry about losing data. Do I know of any reputable modders that offer this service? My go-to would be Voltar, but I don't see the service listed on his site. There's a ton of good modders. I always recommend starting by who's closest to you. It is tricky because if the FRAM chip is on the bottom of your model Saturn motherboard, it is super easy to pull up traces. And in fact, when I was testing FRAM chips, I did the mod 2 or 3 times to mine. First time it came out perfect. Second time it looked perfect. Everything looked like it was there, but I just ever so slightly pulled up the pad and I had to end up giving it to Jose to fix. So that was frustrating. So definitely find modders with a history of doing this that are close enough to you, hopefully within driving distance, and that would be my suggestion. Are you aware of any similar mods for battery-backed memory cartridges? There was talk out there. There was a few people who made some for one console, and there was some drama of somebody stole the idea or some crap that I didn't pay attention to. I probably should have. But I do think that there are those mods either out there or coming out or something like that. So I would keep your eyes open for those and see. And as soon as I could find ones that I've tested and verified, or at least people that I know and work with have tested and verified, I'll do an article on it. There was one that I thought was already confirmed as good, and I just was waiting for that confirmation to write the post on it, but I don't think it was for NES or SNES. But I hope people start looking into that, because that would be a pretty cool option. And, you know, FRAM chips do have a finite amount of writes to them. So it's not something that would last for 1,000 years. It might outlast all of us. But I do think, depending on your use case scenario, buying a solution that allows you to back up your saves and then changing the battery every few years might actually, or every 10 years might be a better solution, just depending on your total workflow and your needs for this. Lastly, let's circle back around to the Saturn. I received my satiator a few weeks ago from Professor Abrasive, and I seem to remember you mentioning something about manually transferring saves from the Saturn to the satiator itself. I have zero idea how to perform this function. Could you shed some light on the process? Yeah, just check the posts on RetroRGB. I documented that, and I think Samson 7.1 did as well. I'm so sorry if that wasn't Samson who did the article, but I'm pretty sure it was. I even think there was a follow-up video that showed exactly how to do it. But basically, you boot into a Saturn game, if you will, that's a piece of software that then allows you to copy the saves to your SD card, and then you could either back them up or copy them back to it. So yeah, just check the website for that. It'll all be on there. Elmer M has a couple of questions. This is like the fourth time I've tried to respond, and they're constant sirens out the window. I don't know what blew up or something. So if my response sounds a little frustrated, Elmer, I promise it's not you. It's whatever craziness has been going on outside. Question number one, they bought an HDMI splitter that claims it does 4K, but when they connect it, it doesn't. It downscales everything to 1080p. So there's two reasons that this could happen. 2 or 3 reasons. One, it could just be a crappy splitter that lied about its specs, but it could also be related to what other devices you have it plugged in. So let's say, for example, you have it plugged into your 4K TV and you have it plugged into a basic 1080p capture card. Then that splitter is going to see that the capture card can only do 1080p, and it's going to tell your PlayStation 4 Pro, hey, we can't go past 1080p, and that's what would limit it. So that would be a problem. I don't know if there's a potential for that if nothing is plugged into the second output. It could default to something if you don't have any target device in there for that. There's some weird things with HDCP and 4K that are along those lines, so that could be a potential. And there's also splitters out there that do this on purpose, in that one output passes through 4K HDR and the other output actually downscales to 1080p to make it easier for capture cards. I don't think that's the case in yours unless the outputs are reversed or something like that. So I would just make sure that if you have a splitter that you know for a fact is being connected to 2 devices that support 4K HDR with the proper HDCP, then if that's the case and you have 2 target devices that are compliant, get a different switch, because then it's or a splitter, because then it wouldn't be working it correctly. And the second question from Elmer, I had to hard cut this in because I didn't answer it correctly, and I don't want to get caught with another siren. This is a weird one, and I don't know if I have a good answer. But Elmer needs to display a PlayStation 2 to 2 CRTs and a modern LG TV and a capture card. How could I execute this? Well, the TV and the capture card, the modern TV and the capture card part's easy. One of these analog outputs you get to a scaler, then you hook up an HDMI splitter, maybe the Rocketfish one that you have, and send one output to the LG TV. I'm assuming it's got an HDMI input because you mentioned it was modern, and the other to a capture card. So that part's easy, but your CRTs are going to determine the whole first part of this, where it could get really complicated. Are they 2 consumer-grade CRTs? What inputs do they have? Do they have component S-video and composite? Are they PVMs or BVMs? What resolutions do you need to run? 480i and 240p? Or do you need to run 480p to any of these? Do they support 480p? So my answer to that would really depend on the answer of what are those 2 CRTs. And it could be anything from having a cable that breaks out the composite video for light guns, but instead using that to go to the CRTs and then putting it into a composite video splitter. That would totally work. So it would be RGB SCART into an open source scan converter or a RetroTank split the HDMI output of that, and then take the composite video output of that cable, which I think both of the major cable manufacturers have some kind of breakout cable solution where Luma is sync for the RGB cable, but composite's broken out for light guns. Then break that into a composite video splitter, and you're done. Same thing with, like, if you needed component video to all of that, you could use an Extron crosspoint switch, plug one input in, and try to get 4 outputs to that, and send the outputs to those different ways. But I'd have to know the CRTs, and I'd have to know the signals that you needed in order to answer that properly. Bonus rant, I would love an optical disk drive emulator for the NeoGeo CD. It already works. It's the Neo SD loader. Check out RetroRGB's posts on that for more info. Daniel Lodato said they just got their Satiator, the optical drive emulator for the Saturn that plugs in the back, and they're only getting mono audio. They've tried toggling the in-game option for stereo audio, but it's still only coming out one speaker. So my gut is telling me that this is cabling related, and that maybe when you reached behind your Saturn, maybe you spun it around to insert the Satiator, maybe you wiggled the cable. Maybe the cable was old and frayed, and it broke on the inside, so it looks fine on the outside. Maybe your AV DIN in the back of the Saturn is wearing out. The clear one that I just posted on social media, Jose actually remodded the whole thing, recapped it, put the FRAM mod in, and then did the optical audio mod, and I got it back, and every time I connected it to a display, when I touched the video cable, the video would blink out. So I desoldered the Saturn adapter, found a new one on eBay, which fit good enough, soldered that new one in, and it's absolutely perfect. So it's nothing Jose did when he modded it. It's just sometimes this stuff gets old. So my suggestion would be, first, try a disc, and that'll immediately tell you what it is. Play any Saturn game on there. If you get stereo audio through the disc, but mono audio through the Satiator, immediately contact Professor Abrasive. I'm sure he would want to know either, because that sounds like a very unlikely thing. So that, I would definitely try that first. But if you try a Saturn disc and you're still only having audio coming out one speaker, just start checking one piece at a time. You mentioned that you're going to a bandage switch box, which are known to be very troublesome. So if you do get stereo audio or mono audio when using a disc, I would unplug the SCART connection from the bandage and put anything else in its place. You said you've tried other consoles with no issue. So if you have a Super Nintendo in port 1 and the Saturn in port 4, unplug the Saturn, move SCART cable from port 1 to port 4, and go from there. Is it still mono? Then you know to check your switch, and you know to check anything that goes after the switch. If it's now stereo, if the console that you moved to that part is stereo, move everything back and then replace the Saturn, or maybe even open up the SCART head in the Saturn SCART cable and see if you see a missing connection or anything. And if that's the case, if everything looks fine, do whatever's next easiest. So do you have a friend with a Saturn that they could bring theirs over? Or even better, can they bring their SCART cable over to test? And if not, then just pick up whatever is the easiest one for you to buy from, Retro Access, Insurrection, Retro Gaming Cables. Pick up a new Saturn cable and see if that fixes it. But my guts definitely tell me it's cabling and connections and not the Satiator. But if it is, let everybody know, because that's a weird bug that should definitely be checked up on if it is. But I'm pretty sure you're going to find, my guess would be it's the SCART cable or the bandage switch. But please let me know, because I'm kind of curious if my gut's right on this one or if I'm way off. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. I always have a really good time doing them, and especially thank you to everybody that supports. Because whether it's a monthly service like Patreon or FloatPlane, or heck, even if you just go to retrorgb.com/support, click on the Amazon or eBay link and buy something you were going to buy anyway, all of that is what's keeping these videos, the behind-the-scenes research, the website, and everything related to it alive. So, anybody that supports, just an extra big thank you so much, because I really appreciate it. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.